Patrick, a warm welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, coming from Belfast, I'm going to dispense with the microphone if that's all right with everybody. I hope you can all hear me. Well, Michael, may I say first of all, I'm delighted to be here addressing the Financial Services Club. I think it's been an incredible endeavour. I think what Chris, yourself and many others have put in. Thank you very much, James, for your work this evening on organising this event, and also the indefatigable Linda, amongst others. It's been a great service over the course of recent years, and more importantly, ladies and gentlemen, I must say that, well, to some degree, using an Irish vernacular, today I had the pleasure of lunching with the Sheriff of the City of London and the judges, and that was a unique experience in history at the Old Bailey. A couple of my fellow world traders were with us today, and most importantly, I must say, the Sheriff who is with us this evening, Alderman Professor Michael Manelli, was genuinely a different man. Indeed, to use the Belfast vernacular, Michael, when you walked in this evening, I didn't recognise you with your clothes on, precisely because the incredibly interesting outfits and garb that are the tradition of the City of London, that are the traditions of the Old Bailey, made it really wonderful to see and experience. And I've got to say, I am a super optimistic person about financial markets. I remain convinced of the incredible transformative power that goes on. That may seem odd, given the fact that, 20 years ago, here I was talking about this wonderful tone, capital market revolution. And I mean, capital market revolution at the time, well, actually, it was quite entertaining. We went and talked to lots of media, and I famously remember the capital markets editor of the Daily Telegraph saying, technology coming into finance, well, can't see that happening in my lifetime. And, that wasn't a unique viewpoint at the time, and thank you for your kind words. Miraculously, this book has actually held up to the pressures of time. It's much more predictive 20 years later than I ever honestly thought was going to be the case. It still shocks me to this day. It was a revolution, and I think it's very interesting because so many of the things that have come to pass, and certainly some of the issues, I mean, right now cryptocurrency is incredibly hot to trot. Just to put it in perspective, I did talk about electronic money's online currencies at the time, but I was not talking about the distributed ledger in that regard. So therefore, I'm not Satoshi Nakamoto, one of the few middle-aged men who doesn't claim to be Satoshi Nakamoto in financial markets to this day. But nonetheless, it's been an amazingly interesting journey to take from, this book. And actually, it's interesting how cycles go in technology. I mean, we went from this book to the point where 6 or 7 years ago, when you waved this in front of people, people were very interested because, well, it was a book. I mean, it has a physical interface, it has paper, it's kind of recyclable, but it's not very useful. And there was a Kindle generation, and we already seem to have gone past them at the point where, we're back to book. So there are some things, plus ça change, plus ça devient box, as one of my bosses once famously said in my early career in Tokyo, the money brokers, who were always noted for their incredibly inspirational and interesting and intellectual comments. But nonetheless, going from here to victory or death, I mean, victory or death was naturally a topic that I thought was perfectly reasonable in this era of millennials. No one wants to be triggered, you have to be politically correct, and therefore I thought victory or death was a perfect binary description of the threats that we face. Actually, the story is quite interesting because obviously Michael was talking about Patrick Henry, and that's one very interesting strand. It actually comes from the Bergenstock conference many, many years ago where I chaired the leading panel. It was a thing called Crossfire. And it was very interesting because about 10, 15 years ago, there was a panel of all the different exchange bosses, and the boss of one particular exchange was all very nice and being terribly kind and reasonable about the competition. And then so were the other 2 or 3 people, a regulator, some leading economist, etc., etc. And then finally we turned to Rudolf Ferscher. Rudolf Ferscher was the boss of a thing called Eurex, the Swiss-German futures exchange, who essentially almost put the London Life Exchange out of business. And when Rudy looked around, he said, well, when I look at the exchange business today, when I look at financial markets today, there's an inscription on the wall, and it's actually in German, and it says, for the good of the fatherland, victory or death. That kind of sums up where we are to me. And I think that's very true to this day. And I don't say it because I believe that we're all going to be on the dead side of the ledger. I say it because that is the binary that defines how we're going to move going forward. And you know, I suppose the change that we've had from the point of victory or death being announced at Bergenstock all those years ago, or capital market revolution being launched, is to, well, let's put it this way. I would like you to think about your life in the palm of your hand. Achievement. Very simple. Look at this device. I mean, last week there was a banking conference called Sibos, which I was not at, mainly because I'm not really interested in archaeology. The thing about the Sibos conference was they were giving out, I believe, conference standard Fitbits, okay? And the conference standard Fitbit had more computing power than Apollo 11, which 50 years ago landed on the moon. Now this thing is just absolutely incredible. It doesn't matter whether it's made by Samsung or Huawei or whatever, whether it's an iPhone, whether it's on Android, whatever. But look, it's everything. It is your life. It has all the details of all the people you know. It probably has your accounts on it. It does your email. You can do unbelievable amounts of social media. We know every single meal that we've had for the course of the last 6 months because we put it on Instagram. If you're so interested, you can use it for Twitter, as I do believe the wonderful folks, in fact I can see James in the back of the room, he's busily twittering away at the moment to Frontier Finance from the FS Club website. It's actually incredible. I mean, the amount of optionality. It has cameras that are essentially taking photographs as good as when I was a freelance photographer 20, 30 years ago using this old-fashioned stuff called film. Actually, some of the stuff in this is really incredible. Do you know there's a function in this? I was looking the other day, I was just checking something on social media and then doing something on an Excel spreadsheet. And the thing started vibrating. Can you believe they've actually managed to incorporate a telephone into this personal organizer device? I mean, it's really incredible the extent to which technology has changed. Why does that matter? It matters because Michael discussed the concept of where we are in the last 12 years in terms of finance being under pressure, finance having difficulties, and I talk about that because it's the era of the peaks. And I don't think a lot of people have really taken a step back from the pure financial processing point to really look at how many peaks we've been at over the course of time. This is a little brief introductory slide about myself. Here's one. Bank branches in the United States of America versus mobile phone penetration. I mean, this thing runs out of 2014. Trust me, it does not get any better. If anything, the acceleration is straight down in terms of the number of bank branches, and at this point, it's going straight up. And there are actually cities and towns in the north of England that simply don't have a bank branch anymore. Now, why is that? It's because people are now actually using their mobile devices. If you look at the sign-up rates that people are putting together in terms of their financial devices, how they're investing, how they're trading, some of the stuff in China is really, really interesting. I mean, nobody even uses a tablet or a laptop. They actually use their mobile phone for 90% of their investment decisions. Much more interestingly, as well as the fact that people like Alipay and these other institutions in China are increasingly driving gazillions of transactions per day, they've also got these fascinating opportunities where you can put your money anywhere. I mean, for those who think that the competing world of cryptocurrencies in, say, Europe and the USA is bad, in terms of complexity of opportunity, look at what's going on in China at the moment. You can literally turn around and go, oh, I think I'll drop my money into the S&P 500 overnight, and you can take it out the next morning. Now, there may be a Chinese regulatory crackdown that's going to take place in that regard, but the simple fact of the matter is the complexity and opportunity of investment product is as never before. Now that turns on its head something that's very interesting, because actually what we've done in the course of capital market revolution to date is we've spent a huge amount of money building really funky GUIs. Everything looks lovely. I mean, they all look like, Fisher Price activity trading platforms. What's this button doing? It's all nice and colourful. The truth is, it's like an iceberg. The 80% is the bit below the water, and the bit below the water is settlement, clearing, all actually the difficult to do plumbing. And that's why, in one sense, some of the most interesting M&A that we're going to see in, say, the exchange world in the near future will actually revolve around the settlement business rather than, per se, necessarily the exchange business. So, I begin the book by looking at the view from the peak. And the way I look at it is, we're essentially, we've got peak bank branch. We've had things like peak mobile phone shop, which is a very interesting phenomenon because those effectively dictate the high street. And containerization is a very interesting point that Michael raised in the introduction. But if you're looking at the idea of taking out of the high street the heart of these sorts of functions, it becomes very difficult for standard issue mercantile commerce to really survive in the same way because the dynamics of the high street are totally different. But then the problem is, of course, that the banks themselves have essentially priced themselves out of the markets. Because what we're in at the moment is a peer-to-peer environment. People are lending each other money, they're trading with each other in a way as never before. What's the problem the banks have got? Well, you go and do any sort of transaction in, say, a sophisticated market like the futures exchanges and derivatives and things like that. You can trade a euro-dollar futures contract, $1 million worth of euro-dollars for basically a couple of dollars. Actually, if you're a big trader, you're multinational, you're a member of the exchange, you're in various of the different schemes, you're probably paying 50 cents. So that's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percentage point. The banks are basically screwed because they're at 10%. So they're they're sitting there at effectively 1,000 basis points, and a lot of the wholesale markets are moving at a fraction of 1 basis point. Now that's a huge number. And that therefore leaves us with one of the interesting issues. Obviously I'm not going to run through the whole of the book, but I think it's quite important. I mean, I tend to look at, say, the old maxim, which was, I think, quite a phenomenal one by somebody who knew his way around planning, which was Eisenhower, and he famously said, planning is everything, plans are nothing. And I think the difficulty we now are at is banks are nothing, banking is everything. And that's going to be an alternative world that we're going to see developing in the course of time. Now, what I've tried to do in ignored.Death is outline a series of different issues and break down how the world is changing and what some of these things mean to you. It's not a technology guide. In some ways, it's a history book. It goes back 500-600 years. Now, we're looking at Thomas Gresham, the back of this group. Vitally important figure in commerce. And of course, he is the man who is famed, thanks to a Scottish historian of the 19th century, for a thing called Gresham's Law. Gresham's Law, it's discussed in the book, it's posited by many people going all the way back to the ancient world, but probably the person who really first kicked this off was Nicholas Copernicus. Now, I've become very interested in Nicholas Copernicus because I was fortunate enough, even though I don't look that old, to have attended his funeral. One of the interesting issues of modern day science is that every so often people get very paranoid about, where are people now, where are they buried, and there seems to be a sort of pro-celebrity reburial movement going on. It'll probably soon turn into one of those very, very interesting reality television series or something in order to get the world really interested. So in Copernicus, he was buried as you did when you were basically the management of the church. He was buried on the floorboards of the church. And somebody wanted to find him because in history he'd become rather important for a number of things. Interesting to know that he was actually an economist, he was also an apothecary, he was a physician, he was a chemist, and he also happens, of course, to have done heliocentricity, which is ever so slightly vitally important for the calculation of all sorts of things, including, well, Apollo 11. Now, Copernicus also discussed the whole idea of Gresham's theory, driving good money around and driving out and so on and so forth. And his interesting position for me is obviously related to heliocentricity. I mean, he was the man who turned around and said, well, it's very simple. I mean, effectively, the Earth, we're trundling all the way around the sun. Now, if we really think about it, I think that people come to me a lot and they say, really? What does cryptocurrency do? What is the whole point of where cryptocurrency is going? And I say, well, it's very simple. That's conventional money world v1.0. That's Jerome Powell. He's the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Equally, we could insert there any central bank governor that we wished to, who has his own currency under his suzerainty. But truly, if you look at what's going on in terms of the money world, we're turning everything on its head. Now, whether it's going to be Bitcoin, whether it's going to be something else, the fascinating issue here, and it's a terrifying issue, I was discussing at lunch actually with Robert, is that the power of issuing, minting coin is potentially going away from where government is. Now, there are huge ramifications for that. That has just so many possibilities. I'm not even saying it's a good or a bad thing. It's a victory of deaf opportunity, though, ladies and gentlemen. That's the key thing to bear in mind. And therefore, if we look at the new world of money, it's not just going to be Bitcoin or something like that, which is at the epicenter of this new cryptocurrency world, but it's truly the ability that you can effectively mint your own currency, you can base it upon some sort of an asset value. And 20 years ago, when I was discussing the early origins of this in capital market revolution, nobody thought it was highly plausible. And yet, if we look at how far we've progressed with the whole world of cryptocurrency in the course of the last 2 decades, it is quite obvious that this is the coming thing. So think about the Copernican revolution in money. And that really starts to upend everything that's going on in our financial world, given the fact that, equally, I would posit that over the course of a 500 or 600 year cycle, we have reached the peak of the conventional bank. And that also impacts on a series of other things, because we start then looking at a lot of other issues that have been around for 500 or 600 years, like, for example, double entry bookkeeping. So I get into a discussion where we're talking about triple entry bookkeeping, which is using blockchains in the business of the actual addition of an additive layer, which should make auditing and accounting much faster, much safer, and much better for investors. And indeed, one of the very interesting things that I looked at when I'm talking about this whole book is, you know, banks have peaked. But again, bear in mind the fact that it's very common, people who write books that relate to financial technology, they always go, banks, they'll all be dead by next Thursday. Well, the truth is, when you're dealing with a cycle of banking that has lasted since Copernicus' birth, or earlier, so we're talking 500 years, it's not going to be an overnight experience. But it is going to be something that's going to carry on throughout the course of our lifetimes. And equally, the one model which comes up is exchanges. And it's very, very interesting because, of course, parties will say, well, look at the London Stock Exchange, it's been losing market share for the course of the last umpteen years, blah, 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 and the same could be said of many exchanges around the world. The simple fact of the matter is that despite being a model that has existed since several thousand years before Christ, exchanges really are the model, or certainly a dominant model of e-commerce. A lot of people look at Airbnb and Uber. One of the things that's most frustrating about going to a technology conference are people who stand up and go, wow, you know, it's really interesting, this new digital age, because, like, look at Airbnb, they don't own a single hotel room. Look at Uber, they don't own a single taxi. This is because, dearest Muppet, they are an exchange. That's what I always want to say. Because it's truly a very, very interesting issue that where we're going to, with banking being effectively compressed, and therefore services in a peer-to-peer related world, pushing towards ever lower frictional costs of operation, and ultimately an improvement of the back offices et al., that exchanges become the epicenter of commerce. And therefore, if we look at something like the dear old cars that we have down here, this thing over here, I'm a bit of a petrolhead, so this thing over here, this is the Tesla in sort of like 1897. It's a thing actually called the Loaner Porsche. This man here is actually a man called Ferdinand Porsche. Whatever happened to him. The interesting thing for me is, if you look at these cars, their DNA is effectively hugely related to the cars that we see on the road around us today. But of course, if I offered you the keys to either of these, nobody would want to drive them home because they're effectively a very, very early, primeval, uncomfortable, and indeed, judging from the heavy nature of the attire of this gentleman in the Ford Model T, not exactly suited to the British climate. But the thing that's important to take out of this is, a lot of people talk about Bitcoin. Now, 5 or 6 years ago, Bitcoin was being discussed as really the future of money. Simple fact is, Bitcoin isn't the future of money, probably. It's part of the future of money, because what we very rapidly saw were dozens and dozens of other cryptocurrencies coming together. But what Bitcoin has done, and this is what the cryptocurrencies or the electronic monies of, say, the capital market revolution era didn't do, is it reached a sufficient scalable network effect in order to manage to progress. So there was beans. I mean, in the late 1990s, when I wrote Capital capital market revolution. I was part of it in London, part of it in Italy, part of it in Australia, and while I was travelling around the world. And it was very interesting because at that point, beans was hugely the big thing. They were on the side of buses everywhere, they were being advertised all over the world, and that was going to be the future. Went spectacularly bust. I think 45 venture capitalists all took a bath. They raised what was at that point in time, I mean, now a really spectacular number, about 65 million. Obviously, in comparison to say something like WeWork, a mere drop in the ocean by current financing equivalents. But the thing that was interesting was they never reached a scalable effect. What was the point about the difference between the curved dash Oldsmobile and the Ford Model T? The curved dash Oldsmobile was basically too expensive for the working man to own. The Ford Model T was absolutely affordable because Henry Ford wanted to make sure that he could mass produce a car that everyone, his own workers, could buy and take home. As a result of that, the Ford Model T effectively creates infrastructure. Because people drive their cars, then people want to encourage people to use their cars, so they build things within 10, 20, 30 miles of where the cars are. Fun fairs, amusement arcades of some sort or another, all manner of things that encourage people to get in their car on a weekend and go and use them for leisure activity. At that point in time, people start tarmacking over their road because you prefer to drive on a tarmac road than a dust road. And local authorities realised very quickly in America that's what they needed to do. Equally, then people at the side of the road realised they could sell their fruit and vegetables more easily rather than taking them into market. Then we reached the point where we get value addition. You know what, if we can sell them the vegetables, actually the people are all complaining that they're hungry, so we'll sell them a coffee and we'll make them something with the fresh fruit and vegetables, and thus the roadside restaurant was born. And what Bitcoin has done is Bitcoin has become the Ford Model T of the cryptocurrency era. It's not going to be the cryptocurrency that you're going to want to own and take home and have at the epicenter of your cryptocurrency in 20 years' time. But it is the thing that will be recognizably similar to the kinds of electronic money that people are going to be using in the future. And so, in that sense, I'm very quickly skimming over how we looked at the peak of banker power, how we look at the Copernican revolution in money, which is effectively cryptocurrency itself. The distributed ledger I discuss in many different aspects in terms of how that impacts our world as well in the course of the book. And then there's a variety of different issues in relation to the Ford Model T and Bitcoin and so on in its own right. The book itself, I am terribly sorry, we suffered a logistical foible at the weekend, and they have not arrived this evening, which is very disappointing. Sometimes the physical world has these things. The book will not actually be in the shops for about another 10 days anyway. So therefore, if you would like a copy, it's going to be, give me 20 pounds, and I will make sure that I deliver you a signed copy before the end of the week, before I go back home to Malta. Equally, I do have a few copies of this if anybody's really a junkie for distributed ledger. This is DLT Malta, Thought from the Blockchain Island. That was a book I edited earlier this year, which is all about the impact of blockchain in the world. I'm lucky enough to live along with my wife Beata in the wonderful Republic of Malta. Very nice, pleasant, sunny clime with lots of delightful trips, and as you may know, we've become, well, we self-assessed ourselves as the blockchain island some ways back. The Prime Minister wrote an excellent foreword to this book. This is a book that really talks you through some of the things that we've been doing in Malta and how the blockchain will look going forward. Victory or death, ladies and gentlemen, it's a simple binary choice. I'm delighted to have had the backing not just of Michael, but also of the chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, a man called Jeffrey Sprecher, who's simply the greatest entrepreneur in the history of financial market structure the world has ever seen. A man who built a business in the course of the last 20 years that went from nothing to owning the New York Stock Exchange amongst other assets. He's written the foreword to the book. And I'm delighted to commend it to you, but I can see various parties in the audience who I suspect are itching to ask some questions. So I'm delighted to discuss anything you wish about the